deny the Chinese or any people of Asia, whether central, upper, or lower, the possession of any knowledge or even perception of spiritual things is perfectly ridiculous. From one end to the other, the country is full of mystics, religious philosophers, Buddhist saints, and magicians. Belief in a spiritual world full of invisible beings who, on certain occasions, appear to mortals objectively is universal. According to the belief of the nations of Central Asia, remarks I.J. Schmidt, the earth and its interior, as well as the encompassing atmosphere, are filled with spiritual beings, which exercise an influence perfectly beneficent, partly malignant, on the whole of organic or inorganic nature. Especially our deserts and other wild or uninhabited tracts or regions in which the influences of nature are displayed on a gigantic and terrible scale, regarded as the chief abode of rendezvous of evil spirits. And hence the steppes of Tehran, and in particular the great sandy deserts of Gobi, have been looked on as the dwelling place of malignant beings from days of hoary antiquity. Marco Polo, as a matter of course, mentions more than once in his curious book of travels these tricky nature spirits of the desert. Marco Polo, The Travels, The Noisy Desert, page 84. The city I have mentioned, which stands at the point where the traveler enters the great desert, is a big city called Lope, and the desert is called the Desert of Lope. The city is subject to the Great Khan, and the inhabitants worship Muhammad. I can tell you that travelers who intend to cross the desert rest in this town for a week to refresh themselves and their beasts. At the end of the week, they stock up with a month's provisions for themselves and their beasts. Then they leave the town and enter the desert. The truth is this: when a man is riding by night through this desert, and something happens to make him loiter and lose touch with his companions by dropping asleep or for some other reason, and afterwards he wants to rejoin them, then he hears spirits talking in such a way that they seem to be his companions. Sometimes, indeed, they even hail him by name. Often these voices make him stray from the path so that he never finds it again. And in this way, many travelers have been lost and have perished. And sometimes in the night, they are conscious of a noise like the clatter of a great cavalcade of riders away from the road, and believing that these are some of their own company, they go where they hear the noise, and when day breaks, find they are victims of an illusion and in an awkward plight. And there are some who, in crossing the desert, have seen a host of men coming towards them, and suspecting that they were robbers, have taken flight. So having left the beaten track and not knowing how to return to it, they have gone hopelessly astray. Yes, in even daylight men hear spirit voices, and often you fancy you are listening to the strains of many instruments, especially drums, and the clash of arms. For this reason, bands of travelers make a point of keeping very close together. Before they go to sleep, they set up a sign pointing in the direction in which they have to travel, and round the necks of all their beasts they fasten little bells, so that by listening to the sound they may prevent them from straying off the path. For centuries, and especially in the last one, had his strange stories been completely rejected? No one would believe him when he said he had witnessed time and again with his own eyes the most wonderful feats of magic performed by the subjects of Kublai Khan and adepts of other countries. Marco Polo, The Travels, pages 109. For this purpose, the great Khan leaves this palace and goes elsewhere. But before we follow him, let me tell you of a strange thing which I had forgotten. You must know that when the great Khan was staying in his palace and the weather was rainy or cloudy, he had wise astrologers and enchanters who by their skill and their enchantments would dispel all the clouds and the bad weather from above the palace, so that while bad weather continued all around, the weather above the palace was fine. The wise men who do this are called Tibetians and Kashmiris. These are two races of men who practice idolatry. They know more of diabolical arts and enchantments than any other men. They do what they do by the art of the devil, but they make others believe that they do it by great holiness and by the work of God. For this reason, they go about filthy and begrimed, with no regard for their own decency or for the persons who behold them. They keep the dirt on their faces, never wash or comb, but always remain in a state of squalor. These men have a peculiar custom, of which I will tell you. When a man is condemned to die and is put to death by the authorities, they take the body and cook it and eat it. But if anyone dies a natural death, they would never think of eating. Here's another remarkable fact about these enchanters, or Bakhishi, as they are called. I assure you that when the great Khan is seated in his high hall at his table, which is raised more than 8 cubits above the floor, and the cups are on the floor of the hall, a good 10 paces distance from the table, and are full of wine and milk and other pleasant drinks, these Bakshi contrive by their enchantment and their art that the full cups rise up of their own accord from the floor on which they have been standing, and come to the great Khan without anyone touching them. And they do this in the sight of 10,000 men. What I have told you is the plain truth, without a word of falsehood. And those who are skilled in necromancy will confirm that this is perfectly feasible. Marco Polo, The Travels, page 298. I give you my word that the Christians of this island are the most expert enchanters of the world. It is true that the Archbishop does not approve of these enchantments and castigates and rebukes them for the practice. But this has no effect, because they say their forefathers did these things of old and they are resolved to go on doing them. And the Archbishop cannot override their resolve, but what he cannot cure, he must needs endure. So the Christians of the island go on with their enchantments at their own sweet will. Let me tell you something about them. You may take it for a fact that these enchanters perform feats of many kinds, and in no small measure bring about what they desire. If a pirate ship has done some damage to the islanders, she cannot sail from the island without first making amends for the damage done. She may set sail before a favoring breeze and make some headway on her course, but they will conjure up a headwind and force her to turn back. They can make the wind blow from whatever quarter they may wish. They can calm the sea at will or raise a raging storm and a howling gale. There are masters of many other marvelous enchantments, but I think I better not speak of these in this book, because these enchantments produce effects of which, were men to hear them, might set them at marveling overmuch. So let us leave it at that and say no more. On his deathbed, Marco was strongly urged to retract his alleged quote-unquote falsehoods, but he solemnly swore to the truth of what he said, adding that he had not told one half of what he had really seen. There is now no doubt that he spoke the truth, since Marsden's edition and that of Colonial Yule have appeared. The public is especially beholden to the latter for bringing forward so many authorities corroborative of Marco's testimony, and explaining some of the phenomena in the usual way. For he makes it plain beyond question that the great traveler was not only a veracious, but an exceedingly observant writer, warmly defending his author, the conscientious editor, after enumerating more than one hitherto controvert and even rejected point in the Venetian's travels, concludes by saying, "Nay, the last 2 years have thrown a promise of light even on what seemed the wildest of Marco's stories, and the bones of a venerable Rukh from New Zealand lie on the table of Professor Owen's desk. The monstrous bird of the Arabian Nights or Arabian mythology, as Webster called the Rukh or rock, having been identified, the next thing in order is to discover and recognize that Aladdin's magical lamp has also certain claims to reality." Marco Polo, The Travels, page 300. I should add that ships cannot sail to the other islands that lie farther south beyond Madagascar and Zanzibar, because the current sets so strongly towards the south that they would have little chance of returning. Therefore, they do not venture to go. You may note that ships coming from Mabar to the island make the voyage in 20 days, whereas the return trip take them all of 3 months. And this is due to the continual southward set of current. It flows in the same direction all the time, southward, ever southward. These more southerly islands, which men do not willingly visit because of this southward drift, are very numerous, and it is said that they are inhabited by a Gryphon bird, which make their appearance here at certain seasons of the year. But you must know that they are by no means as men in our country suppose, or as we portray them, half bird, half lion. According to the report of those who have seen them, it is not true that they are a blend of bird and lion, but I assure you that these men, the actual eyewitnesses, report that in build they are just like eagles, but of the most colossal size. Let me tell you first what these eyewitnesses report, and then what I have seen myself. They report they are so huge and bulky that one of them can pounce on an elephant and carry it up to a great height in the air, then let it go so that the elephant drops to the earth and it is smashed to pulp, whereupon the Gryphon bird poaches on the carcass and feeds at its ease. They add that they have a wingspan of 30 paces, and their wing feathers are 12 paces long and of a thickness proportionate to their length. What I have seen myself, I will tell you elsewhere, since that fits it better with the plan of the book. Altogether, their beasts and birds are so different from ours that it is a marvel to hear tell of them, and a greater marvel to behold them. To return for a moment to the Gryphon bird, I should explain that the islanders call them Rukhs, and know them by no other name, and have no idea what a griffin is. But I feel sure from the monstrous size they attribute to the birds that they cannot be anything but griffins. Tales of the Arabian Nights. The Fifth Voyage of Sinbad the Sailor, page 157. We sailed from city to city, and from island to island, and from sea to sea, viewing the cities and countries by which we passed, and selling and buying, and not a few, till one day we came to a great uninhabited island, deserted and desolate, whereupon was a white dome of biggest bulk half buried in the sands. The merchants landed to examine the dome, leaving me in the ship. And when they drew near, behold, it was a huge Rukh's egg. They fell a beating it with stones, knowing not what it was, and presently broke it open, whereupon much water ran out of it, and the young Rukh appeared within. So they pulled it forth of the shell, and cut its throat, and took of it great store of meat. Now I was in the ship, and knew not what they did. But presently one of the passengers came up to me and said, O my lord, come and look at the egg we thought to be a dome. So I looked, and seeing the merchants beating it with stones, called out to them, Stop, stop, do not meddle with that egg, or the bird Rukh will come out and break our ship and destroy us. But they paid no heed to me, and gave not over smiting upon the egg, when behold, the day grew dark and dim, and the sun was hidden from us, as if some great cloud had passed over the firmament. So we raised our eyes, and saw what we took for a cloud was the Rukh, poised between us and the sun, and it was his wings that darkened the day. When he came and saw his egg broken, he cried a loud cry, whereupon his mate came flying up, and they both began circling about the ship, crying out at us with voice louder than thunder. I called the Reyes and crew, put out to sea, and seek a safety in flight before we are all destroyed. So the merchants came on aboard, and we cast off and made haste from the island to gain the open sea. When the Rukhs saw this, they flew off, and we crowded all sail on ship, thinking to get out of this country. But presently the two reappeared, and flew after us, and stood over us, each carrying in his claws a huge boulder which it had brought from the mountains. As soon as the he-Rukh came up with us, he let fall upon us the rock. He held in his pounces, but the master put about the ship, so that the rock missed her by some small matter, and plunged into the waves with such violence that the ship pitched high, and then sank into the trough of the sea, and the bottom of the ocean appeared. To us then the she-Rukh let fall her rock, which was bigger than that of her mate, and, as destiny had decreed it, fell on the poop of the ship and crushed it, the rudder flying into 20 pieces, whereupon the vessel foundered, and all and everything on board were cast into the main. As for me, I struggled for sweet life, till Almighty Allah threw in my way one of the planks of the ship, to which I clung, and bestriding it, fell a paddling with my feet. Describing his passage through the great desert of Lop, Marco Polo speaks of a marvelous thing, which is that when travelers are on the move by night, they will hear spirits talking. Sometimes the spirits will call him by name. Even in the daytime one hears these spirits talking. And sometimes you shall hear the sound of a variety of musical instruments, and still more commonly the sound of drums. In his notes, the translator quotes the Chinese historian Metwatling, who corroborates the same. During the passage of the wilderness you hear sounds, says Metwatling, sometimes of singing, sometimes of wailing, and it has often happened that travelers going aside to see what those sounds might be have strayed from their course and been entirely lost, for they were voices of spirits and goblins. These goblins are not peculiar to the Gobi, adds the editor, though that appears to have been their most favorite haunt. The awe of the vast and solitary desert raises them in all similar localities. Colonial Yule would have done well to consider the possibility of serious consequences arising from the acceptance of his theory. If we have missed that the weird cries of the Gobi are due to the awe inspired by the vast and solitary desert, why should the goblins of the Gadarenes, Luke 8:29, be entitled to any better consideration? And why not Jesus have been self-deceived as to his objective tempter during the 40 days trial in the wilderness? We are quite ready to receive or reject the theory enunciated by Colonel Yule, but shall insist upon its impartial application to all cases. Pliny speaks of the phantoms that appear and vanish in the deserts of Africa. Aethicus, the early Christian cosmographer, mentions thought incredulous, the stories that were told of the voices of singers and revelers in the desert. And Masudi tells of the ghouls, which in the deserts appear to travelers by night and in lonely hours. And also of Apollonius of Tyana and his companions, who in a desert near the Indus by moonlight saw an impusa or ghoul taking many forms. They revile it, and it goes off, utters shrill cries. And Ibn Battuta relates a like legend of the Western Sahara. If the messengers be solitary, the demons sport with him and fascinate him, so that he strays from his course and perishes. Now, if all these matters are capable of a rational explanation, and we do not doubt it as regards most of these cases, then the Bible devils of the wilderness deserve no more consideration, but should have the same rule applied to them. They too are creatures of terror, imagination, and superstition. Hence the narrative of the Bible must be false, and if one single verse is false, then a cloud is thrown upon the title of all the rest of it to be considered divine revelation. Once admit this, and this collection of canonical documents is at least as amenable to criticism as any other book of stories. There are many spots in the world where the strangest phenomena have resulted from what was later ascertained to be a natural physical cause. In Southern California, there are certain places on the seashore where the sand, when disturbed, produces a loud musical ring. It is known as the musical sand, and the phenomenon is supposed to be of an electrical nature. The sound of musical instruments, chiefly of drums, is a phenomenon of another class and is really produced in certain situations among sand hills when the sand is disturbed, says the editor of Marco Polo. A very striking account of a phenomenon of this kind, regarded as supernatural, is given by Friar Odoric, whose experience I have traced to the Rukh, or flowing sand, north of Kabul. Besides this celebrated example, I have noted the equally well-known one of the Jabal Nakats, or Hill of the Bell, in the Sinai Desert. Gebel Thabul, or Hill of the Drums. A Chinese narrative of the 10th century mentions the phenomenon as known near Quachu on the eastern border of the Lope Desert under the name of Singing Sands. That all these are natural phenomena no one can doubt. But what of the question and answers plainly and audibly given and received? What of the conversations held between certain travelers and the invisible spirits or unknown beings that sometimes appear to hold caravans in tangible form? If so many millions believe in the possibility that spirits may clothe themselves with material bodies behind the curtain of a medium and appear to the circle, why should they reject the same possibility for the elemental spirits of the deserts? This is the to be or not to be of Hamlet. If spirits can do all that spiritualists claim for them, why can they not appear equally to the traveler in the wildernesses and solitudes? A recent scientific article in a Russian journal attributes such voices, such spirit voices in the Great Gobi Desert to the echo. A very reasonable explanation. if it can only be demonstrated that these voices simply repeat what has been previously uttered by a living person. But when the superstitious traveler gets intelligent answers to his question, this Gobi echo at once shows a very near relationship with the famous echo of the theater of Port Saint Martin at Paris. "How do you do, sir?" shouts one of the actors in the play. "Very poorly, my son, thank you. I am getting old, very, very old," politely answers the echo. What incredulous merriment must the superstitious and absurd narratives of Marco Polo concerning the supernatural gifts of certain shark and wild beast charmers of India, whom he terms a Brahmin, have excited for long centuries. Describing the pearl fishery of Ceylon as it was in his time, he says that the merchants are obliged also to pay those men who charm the great fishes to prevent them from injuring the divers whilst engaged in seeking pearls under water. 1/20th part of all that they take, these fish charmers are termed a Brahmin or Brahmin, and their charms hold good for that day only, for at night they dissolve the charms so that the fishes can work mischief at their will. These are Brahmin, known also how to charm beasts and birds and every living thing. And this is what we find in the explanatory notes of Colonial Yule in relation to this degrading Asiatic superstition. Marco accounts of the pearl fishery is still substantially correct. At the diamond mines of northern Sirkars, Brahmins are employed in the analogous office of propitiating the tutelary genii. The shark charmers are called in Tamil Kadi, sea binders, and in Hindustani hay banda, or shark binders. At Aripo, they belong to one family, supposed to have the monopoly of the charm. The chief operator is, or was not many years ago, paid by the government, and he also received 10 oysters from each boat daily during the fishery. Tenant, on his visit, found the incumbent of the office to be a Roman Catholic Christian, but that did not seem to affect the exercise of the validity of his functions. It is remarkable that not more than one authenticated accident from sharks had taken place during the whole period of the British occupation. Two items of fact in the above paragraph are worthy of being placed into juxtaposition. The British authorities pay professional shark charmers a stipend to exercise their art, and two, only one life has been lost since the execution of the contract. We have yet to learn whether the loss of this life did not occur under the Roman Catholic sorcerer. Is it pretended that the salary is paid as a concession to a degrading native superstition? Very well, but how about the sharks? Are they receiving salaries also from the British authorities, either the Secret Service Fund? Every person who has visited Ceylon must know that the waters of the Pearl Coast swarm with sharks of the most ferocious kind, and that it is even dangerous to bathe, let alone to dive for oysters. We might go farther if we chose and give the names of British officials of the highest rank in the Indian service who, after resorting to native magicians and sorcerers to assist them in recovering their loss or in unraveling vexatious mysteries of one kind or another, and being successful, and at the time secretly expressing their gratitude, have gone away and shown their innate cowardice before the world's Areopagus by publicly denying the truth of magic and leading jests against Hindu superstition.